What's going on YouTube? Today we got an scx10 2 slider. Well, I got it with minus everything you see, like the shocks, axles, links, servo. It did come with links, but it came with plastic ones, which I believe are stock. And yeah, a lot of these parts are going to look familiar to some of you, and that's because I stole them off my scx10 for this. Save a little bit of money, but let's get right into wrenching. The axles that I've chose for this are just F10 straight axles in the plastic axle housings. I've had rather good luck with Vanquish's plastic axle housings. I haven't broken them, or even, now that I think about it, a axle shaft. So I've been having pretty good luck with them. I've been running the plastic housings for quite some time. I've had them on the carbon, they're on the G-Speed, and now here. So pretty bulletproof option for myself. I know for one of my buddies that has not been the case. To attach the ring gear to the spool, there's just going to be 6 1.5mm screws that you're going to want to use some red Loctite on, so that way that doesn't fall apart on you, which I imagine if you didn't use it, it would probably be fine, but just as a reinsurance factor, just doing some preventative maintenance would not hurt. Definitely don't want to be rebuilding a axle on the trail that could have been prevented from the start. So there's some Vanquish red lock that I've got extra of in a Vanquish VRD carbon kit, and now we're going to be using it here. With the third member kind of unofficially assembled without the screws, it spins smoothly like butter, which is what you want. And then there's going to be 4 2mm screws that screw the third member into this piece here. And as you can see here, everything's smooth like butter. There's a range shrink factor that everything spins freely and no binding of what have you. And then I quickly took it apart off camera and added a bunch of grease. As you can see there, definitely a must if you're gonna play in water. I use a cow RC udder butter. Been getting the job done, and as you can see, I've been using quite a bit of it, so that way we don't have bearings explode on us while we're out on the trail, because that wouldn't be fun. Definitely don't want that to be a day ender or something we have to do out on the trail, when that again could have been prevented from the start. Now the third member, this slides on into the rear piece of the front axle housing, and then there's going to be additional 4 2mm screws. I was gonna say 2.5. Now that we know everything spins freely, there's no binding, getting that grease moved around in there, let I put quite a bit in, because I like to take my trail truck through water, and that's pretty much a must if you're going to be going through water like I do. Just minus the ripper, that stays out. That stays out of mud and water, snow. This car is just like a summertime car if you think about it. But now, going to the knuckles, which is a fairly easy thing to do. I pretty much assembled the front and the rear without instructions. The only thing I really needed instructions for was the screw length. And just gonna preemptively lube up the spot in which the bearing sits. And just want to get a good amount of grease there so those bearings don't rust and explode. Because I don't feel like placing bearings out on the trail. So there is that, and there's just one on either side. Moving right along to the front axle shafts. Now there is a longer and shorter one, which is pretty self-explanatory. The longer one goes on the longer side of the axle housing, and then the shorter one goes on the short side of the axle housing, which is pretty self-explanatory if you ask me, but you know. And then these just slide right on in through the bearings. And then you're going to grab a pin, and then your hex is going to go on that as well. And then, which also has a 1.5 millimeter screw. You don't have to run that, but it kind of helps. So that way when you take wheels off and the hex doesn't decide to come with it, the pin drops out, then you lose that, which I am not taking any chances. So I'm going to be putting that little 1.5 rib screw in there. With one of the front knuckles axle's now assembled, we're just gonna go ahead and add some grease into where the bearing sits, because water and rusty bearings. So you could definitely get, I don't know if Fast Eddie makes a stainless steel bearing kit for F10 straights. Could, I'm just not aware of them. But you get a bearing on either side of the axle housing, and then your axle shafts just slide right on through. Again, the long side going in the long side, and then the short, you want in the short side, and then there's just going to be two top and bottom 2mm screws. With the wheel nut going on, that wraps up that side of the front axle. Now it's just the same thing on the corresponding side, exact same process. Now again, these drag link and tie rod came from my scx10.1, and the spot in which the drag link goes from knuckle to knuckle, I had to find a spacer to fit in between the link, or the rod end, and that upper portion there. I'm just happy I had spacers to put there, because it's kind of like the F9s on my ripper, how they have a little spacer or something there to make up the difference. With the front axle now fully completed, we can push that to the side and bring on the rear, which is easier. You don't have the extra steering components like you do with the front, but still the front and the rear are very easy to assemble. They come with instructions that I've used loosely. I have assembled quite a few of Vanquish's axles, so I can go without the instructions. I've assembled like 2 sets of F10 portals, and now this, which is pretty much the same, just minus the portal boxes, because obviously these are straight axles, so you don't have the extra gear set in there, and you can have your throttle normal, because with portals you have to reverse your throttle because of the extra set of gears in the portal boxes, make forward, backwards, and backward, forwards, but we don't have that here because, again, straight axles. assembling the third member is the exact same on what we did with the front. There's going to be 6 1.5 millimeter screws with some Nerd Loctite to help keep that all held together. Bearings now being well greased and the places on which they sit being also greased, making sure that those aren't going to rust, because I'm not going to be seeing these bearings for a little bit of time. And there's going to be 4 2mm screws to attach the third member together. And then once you have that, then it's again an additional 4 2mm screws that attach this whole ordeal to the rear axle housing. With the third member gears now being well greased, this just slides right back together. And like I said earlier, it's just 4 2mm screws that hold this in the back.
Now that one side of the axle housing is now greased and ready for the bearing. Grab your rear axle shaft, a bearing, and then this metal washer piece, I don't know what we're gonna call it, but that goes on after. Then this slides into your rear axle, into that center section, and then you're gonna have a plastic collar that goes over. Then you can put your pin in, and then your hex, and then to hold that plastic collar there in is just two 2mm screws. With the opposing side being done off camera because it's the same process on which we already did. And as you can see here, we already have the drive shafts on, which is just held on with a 2mm screw. So being these links came off my scx10 that I have had for a year, its entire lifespan has been on this channel, but I've had it for a year, and being these links came off of there, the pivot balls aren't really pivoty. It kind of helped installing the rear axle, them not wanting to flop around a whole bunch, so on that aspect it kind of helps, but ideally you probably would be throwing these out, let's be real here. But in an effort to save some money, we're going to be reusing them. Like the transmission also was going to be coming out of the 10.1 as well. And with the lengths going on, the uppers going from the frame rail to the top of the axle, and then the ones from your skid plate go to the lower portions, and then your shocks follow through shortly after. Now that everything with the links are done, it is shock time, which these are just RC 4-wheel drive 100mm King shocks. Had them on my 10.1. As you can see, these are a new set. They're not the ones off of there. I've had these sitting around for a little bit, so I might as well throw on a new pair of shocks. And for oil, I don't run anything crazy. I just run 35 weight. It's what I run in my G-Speed. I've ran 35 in my carbon. So that's just been something I've really haven't played around with shock oil weight too much. Not something I do a whole lot of, but it's just been okay for me. So given that these obviously are not Vanquish pivot balls for the shocks, there's gonna be a little bit of play. So I have some spacers. Again, I've had to do that with the G-Speed, the Deluxe Fab Ultra Short shocks that I ran on the carbon before I sold it. That's just whatever. There's probably a way to change out the pivot balls, but I just throw spacers in and call it a day. Just easy, quick, simple, easy. Here you can kind of see what I mean by the shock kind of shimmies back and forth within the space in which it goes, with just held on with a 2mm screw. So I've had to take that out and ran 2 thin spacers there, and then I had to go digging through my hardware to find more, but that's just the way things go. You can see it a little bit better than how to run 2 thin spacers, but that's just the way a cookie crumbles. Sometimes when you piece things together, you gotta make some modifications or just make things work, which is what I did. So it's just gonna be a 2mm screw to hold the shock into where it mounts on the shock towers, but I forgot to put the spacer in between the shock and the shock tower, so that way you get no binding when you have shock travel. Your springs don't bind on the frame rails, and you have a suspension that works properly. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do the other side off camera because it's the same thing on what we just did together, but that is going to do it there. Thank you guys for watching.